don't seem to have a presentation yet. Okay. I feel like I should be asking everyone where they're from. The internet. Okay.
Here you go.
Are we good? I believe that's me, yep. Hi, my name is Quinn Norton, and I have spent the last 83 years of internet time studying groups like Anonymous and Occupy, and more recently, Telecomics. And I have come to realize that I spend a lot of time feeling like Alice through the looking glass. So she provides kind of a theme to my talk, because what I've found about these networks is that they tend to invert many of our assumptions about how the world works. I really started explicitly looking at what a leaderless, organizationalist collective looks like looking at Anonymous. I went on to do 3 months of coverage of Occupy, wherein I moved from park to park and lived with people and studied their lives, and then watched them get beaten and arrested and all their stuff thrown into crusher trucks. More recently, I've been looking at at Telecomics, which is a much smaller, kind of anonymous-like collective, but tends to give me less ulcers. And then before all of this, I started out kind of as not only an observer, but a participant in the hackerspace movement. And hackerspaces also, they have many different forms, but they kind of converge on this leaderless collective. And it is a very different kind of landscape. The things that you think are required to make the world work are all turned on their head when you're inside of these structures, and it gets scary and weird. But any conversation about these things needs lolcats. Actually, I just think at this point every presentation needs lolcats. And this one's perfect, because really lolcats are how you survive this stuff, if you survive this stuff. I'm going to go ahead and look at my crib notes for real quick here. In defining what I mean by a stochastic revolutionary network collective, it's an aggregate collective of people that converge on a common aesthetic. They don't have leaders, but they can kind of emerge actions and shared values. They respond to current events and stimuli, often in quite predictable ways. They can become something that you can recognize. They represent, in the end, I have discovered, a distinct way of being in the world. A collective of individuals, something that I think we've seen echoes of in history but never actually seen before. And for this entity, for this, I sometimes call it a slime mold of humanity, for this networked organism, the internet provides a kind of nervous system or a kind of lymphatic system. But even in this metaphor, I have found in my travels that blood is still blood, because when, so the circulatory system is still just the circulatory system, because when these networks, when these ways of being in the world hit the real world, there is a lot of blood. And to this day, when you look at things like the Arab Spring, you're looking at a way of sharing that has resulted in, nobody knows for sure, but tens of thousands of deaths, and the Occupy itself, just in America, close to 7,000 arrests. When these things hit the traditional world, shit happens. But there's a little unicorn chaser for all that heavy shit. To understand these things, and again, going back to one of my favorite moments in Through the Looking Glass is when Alice is trying to figure out how to get to the top of the hill, and every which way she goes towards the top of the hill, she ends up back at the bottom. And in the end, the trick is to hold your breath and head the wrong direction. These are networks in which everything works wrong. And let me go ahead and pull up 3 examples. One is an inversion of selection. In terms of how we normally do it. Clay Shirky talked about the internet as a publish then select medium, and nothing inhabits that better than anonymous. One of the reasons that the press often gets anonymous wrong is because we are used to the idea that the bombastic statement of something about to occur is the last part of the process of deciding to do it. In anonymous, it's the way you say you want to talk about something. You make a bombastic, apocalyptic declaration that you're going to take down Facebook, and that means to everybody else in Anonymous that you would like to talk about whether or not to take down Facebook. At this point, Operation Facebook is just there to troll the media. Every once in a while, somebody kicks up Operation Facebook to see how many newspapers they can get to write about it. And Anonymous is perfectly comfortable with that idea of publish then select. The rest of us who, okay, I say the rest of us, but I bet some of you are anonymous. If you are anonymous, please don't tell me. One of the rules of my coverage is that I cannot know who you are. For the people who are kind of like outside that, or for those moments when you're outside the collective, because you're a different person when you're in it. This idea that the bombastic statement no longer signals what we think it does is one that can really mess with your head. It becomes much harder to tell what's really going to happen. And that's the kind of thing that makes people in authority crazy. Another one that is really quite moving, this is a picture I took at Occupy Boston. And I saw something at Occupy Boston which burned itself into my brain and will be there till the day I die, which is that Occupy inverted the idea of agency as we have it. Agency, that ability to take an action in the world that may or may not be consequential, is something that we normally put into a status structure. Your amount of agency in the world is relative to how important you are. In the Occupy, you had agency if you wanted to take it. So one of the most moving things I ever saw at the Occupy was an active drug addict who went and shot up and then went off to do the dishes. And he was trying to do the dishes. And no one was going to stop him from trying to do the dishes because it was his choice. And that may not seem like much to watch a man who is clearly struggling with a drug trying to do a bunch of dishes. But that idea that no matter who you are, no matter how much of a reject you are in society, you can take action and that action may matter. Well, there was nowhere but Occupy in America where that could happen. And it's one of the reasons why Occupy took the shape that it did. Because America is a sewn up enough society that if you are somebody who hasn't been given agency by the system, there is no way for you to take it. By the way, just as a tip, life without agency sucks. Now, the third point I want to make about this, I love this graphic. Just the picture's just from the movie, but because none of us are as cruel as all of us, is that both Occupy and Anonymous are in continual states of civil war. You can't tear them apart because they're tearing themselves apart faster than anyone else could possibly do it. And this was very frustrating for me for a while until I realized that there is a strange sort of strength in that. Something that is continually falling down and continually standing up is stable. It may not be stable for any particular individual in it, but as an emergent structure, it remains. And this is why after hundreds of violent evictions in America, the Occupy seems to just keep rolling along and doing things, sometimes burbling up into the newsphere and sometimes not. So, and I guess the last one, the one that everyone knows, is that these things are leaderless. And I have had a lot of time to think about why things like Anonymous, which has been around for a very long time, and Occupy, which hasn't been around as long, never seem to converge on a leader. And this is what I've come to believe, that when you look at something that moves as fast as these structures, you've got something that's allergic to leadership because leadership represents a bottleneck. If any of you have ever administered a network, you know the thing that you hate the most is the point where all the stuff has to slow down, go through a single point, and then come out the other side. What a leader represents, no matter how good they are, is suddenly a point where the room goes from being as smart as all these people to only as smart as one of these people. And so I don't think there's a point at which these structures, as they are, can be co-opted by leadership, because they'd have to lobotomize themselves to do it. Now, this doesn't mean that they ever focus as such as we think of it. They try everything they think of, but they can, because they can go 83 directions at once. Now, one of my favorite things about this, as I came to understand it, was that stochastic leaderless collectives are made of fuck-ups. And normally, fuck-ups don't actually get to have much effect in society. But on the internet, a collection of enough fuck-ups, trying enough things, can have an amazing effect. And this is the port closure in Oakland. But this also brings me back to how traditional power deals with these really strange emergent phenomena. Because this is Oakland by day, and that's Oakland at night. At night was when the flashbangs and tear gas came out, and the rubber bullets. But get enough fuck-ups together and point them vaguely in a direction, and you get this. And that's an act of protest, and this is a map of the act of protests. Now, I went to Poland to try and find out how the act of protests happened. And what I found out is that no one knows. No one knows exactly why. A whole bunch of people, nobody that was organizing or had worked on these issues. I talked to some of the people that had worked on ACTA for years, and at the end of the day, no one knew where it came from. It just happened. That's really interesting. It also points to something that I think will be true, which is that on the internet, we don't actually get to take credit for things anymore. I mean, we all worked on these things. I've been writing about ACTA for a couple of years. But we didn't kill ACTA. The internet did. No particular individual, no particular fuck-up or non-fuck-up gets to say, I did it. So that's going to take some getting used to. So the person who taught me, I think, most fundamentally what the internet is my daughter. And she taught me before she knew how to read, because she found out about some stuff on the internet about her and kind of had a freak out. We had talk and so on and so forth. And I realized that what my daughter saw the internet as the stuff everybody in the world already knew, but they hadn't thought of yet. Also, I'm just going to point out my daughter can jump like a lemur. But for her, this is the internet. The internet is awesome. This is, by the way, what you get if you Google search, image search for awesome. Go internet. It's a place of shared memories and imaginations. And what each of you is on the internet is different from what you are when you're not connected to it. Because what each of you are is a node for the rest. Each of you becomes a prosthetic for the rest of humanity the second you're on the internet. And the rest of humanity is your prosthetic. It used to be the way that, looking at my time, it used to be the way that hierarchical and traditional structures work allowed for predictability of consequences. If you paid your dues, or you were born right, or any number of things that got the right education, you could predict whether or not your actions would be of consequence. But I'll tell you one thing about the network effect as we live now. A fruit seller in a rural town in Tunisia was not supposed to set the world on fire. That came out of nowhere. And if you want to understand why people are freaking out in this sharing war and so on and so forth, that tells you a lot about it. Because for the people who have functioned in traditional hierarchy, even for us when we're not in that structure, because we're all smeared identities, we're all sometimes traditional and sometimes on the net. But for the people of traditional power structures, this is what it looks like. It looks like this thing that is trying to take over everything they understand about the world. And if you want to understand why they fight so hard, it's because this looks like the zombie apocalypse, and we already have their children. When you wonder why traditional power structures are doing what they're doing, they're fighting an existential war against our lolcats. And they're right. You know, when I talk about my work, I have a friend who's a writer in Los Angeles, and he says, sometimes when you talk about these things, I get the sense of the epochal moment out of Terminator that's always summed up in the sentence of, and then Skynet woke up. And I listened to him and I went, and who knew Skynet was us? So when you think about these collectives and how, if you look at them, they're full of strange fuck-ups. Very important section I haven't gotten to yet. One of the reasons I think, and I'm looking for why people are sucked into these things, and I think these days, having sat with a lot of people in parks and having sat on IRC channels a lot, sometimes while sitting in parks, which is weird, one of the things I've noticed, one of the things that stood out to me early on, was that in both Anonymous and Occupy, people called each other brother and sister a lot, which is, frankly, for the American ear, kind of hokey and weird sounding. But I realized that people who came to these structures came and stood in front of riot police and got arrested and beaten, and Anons who were sitting, you know, in their homes somewhere in Middle America were watching people get killed in Bahrain and putting their freedom on the line by hacking stuff because they, for once, after being inconsequential all their lives, felt like something they did had meaning. And oh my gosh, does that affect people a lot. We're past the point of being cynical about nationality. I mean, the people who cling to the idea of national identity look quaint to much of the world. We're getting pretty past the point of believing that God can give us meaning. We're really past a lot of these external structures actually giving us something to live or die for. But these network collectives, they do give people a sense that there's something larger than themselves that they can be part of and that their lives can matter. And that's amazingly powerful when you have the oppressive thought of there being 6.5 billion other people out there all the time. Jabberwocky is this amazing poem that points to actually the breakdown of the English language in a way, because in order to say what he wanted to say, he had to make up new words. And I love that, because that's what the networks are doing, to talk about their meaning and their projects, and to let all the fuck-ups do whatever they want to do and converge on actions which occasionally are really dumb and sometimes amazingly effective in the world. And one of the things I looked at this image as I was deciding to add it, and I thought, I don't know which we are. I don't know if we're the guy with the sword or the Jabberwocky, if that's the Jabberwocky. Yes, I think that's the Jabberwocky. And I guess we're both, depending on what perspective you're looking at it from. Sometimes we're both in the same day. That's all I got. Thanks very much.